Welcome back to part 4 of our series where we are building a trading robot. So, obviously there was very good reception to the first 3 videos. I was not expecting that. Obviously people want to see this topic, so we're going to continue it. Just to give a little bit of perspective, it's interesting, right? So it's been up there a day, I think, right now. It's way above average, right? Way above average. I lost a subscriber from it though. Oh, darn it. But yeah, it's weird. It did really well. I mean, people seem to really like it. So obviously I want to continue it. And so today, what we are going to do is we're going to move on to our next object. We are going to be talking about the StockFrame object. And so just as a little bit of a quick reminder, that is really intended to make it where we can take all of our data and organize it nicely. And so nicely is a very arbitrary word, and it's kind of like, well, what do you mean? Well, naturally, we would like it if we can do certain things with the data relatively easily. And so there's a lot of times we'll find that we're going to be doing certain operations a lot. And it would be kind of nice if all that was kind of ready for us to go instead of having the situation where potentially, trying to do that operation, we'd have to write it out in pandas and it can get a little bit messy. And so the idea is that this StockFrame will kind of have that functionality built into it. And then it will be a little bit easier to do some of those operations. So that's really what we're going to be covering today. And then after that, we are going to be moving on to the trade object. And then we're going to be talking about how to build a trade object that will ideally create an order for us and then help us modify that order as necessary. And so quite interesting. But yeah, really, obviously great response. So that's awesome. That's good to see that people were really liking it. It's kind of funny. Today I was actually doing a lot of research on COVID-19. There's a lot more data out there now. And so it's kind of interesting to see everything in the bigger picture of stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe one day we'll do a video on it or something like that. But it's interesting seeing some of the numbers because a lot of times you hear things or you see headlines and you're like, oh my god, that sounds awful. And then once you kind of put it a little bit more into perspective, you'd be surprised. Oh wow, it's actually certain things might not be as bad as you would think necessarily, at least at first glance. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting. All right. StockFrame. Okay. So if you haven't already, you're going to want to make sure that you have a file structure that looks something like this. And then let's jump into the stockframe.py file. And then from this one, we're going to import a bunch of modules. So the first one is going to be NumPy. And then the second one is going to be pandas. Okay, I was like, why is it giving me a syntax highlight error? And then we're going to be using a lot of date time stuff, at least if I remember correctly. So we're going to have to use time, and then we're going to have to use date time, and then we're going to have to import the time zone object as well. And then just like the previous videos, we will be working with some typing types. So the first one will be a list, obviously, and then the second one will be a dictionary. And then finally, we will import union. And then just additionally, to kind of help improve the IntelliSense performance, we are going to import a couple items from pandas. So we're going to do pandas core, and then it's going to be group by, and then we're going to do the import data frame group by. And so this will make a little bit more sense when we actually get to that particular object. And then from here, we're going to import another one. It's going to be core, and then this one's going to be window, and then this one will be an import rolling group by. So kind of neat. I actually had to do a little bit of research on this because I've used pandas before, but not in such detail in certain regards. And so it was kind of interesting to see how it was all organized and really what you could kind of do with it. So very insightful. I wasn't intending to do that, but it happened. Okay, and then from here, we're gonna create a new object. We're gonna do a StockFrame class. And then this one, just like our previous objects, it's gonna have an init method. This one's gonna be actually pretty simple. It is gonna take an argument called data, and that argument is going to be a list of dictionaries. And so with this one, just like the previous init methods, it doesn't return anything, but at least we wanna specify that, hey, the data that you do send through to us, that will be important, and it does need to be a list of dictionaries. And then from here, we're gonna just define some attributes that will go inside of our class object. So the first one will be data underscore data to be more specific. And then the next one will be frame. This will be a pandas data frame. And then we're gonna create a method where we're gonna create that data frame using the data that we pass through. And so we're gonna do self.createFrame, and then this will create the data frame for us. Additionally, we will do some common operations that might be helpful. So one is we're gonna have our groups already, I hate to say this, but grouped together. And then this one is actually gonna be a data frame group by. And so with this one, it's just gonna be none initially. And then next is gonna be symbol. And this one is gonna be the rolling groups. So this one is basically doing a group by operation, but we're now gonna have like a rolling window. And so this is actually gonna be really useful when it comes to indicators, because with indicators, there's a lot of operations where we have to do this rolling window when it comes to the calculation. So having a lot of this already set up beforehand will actually make performance a little bit better in the terms of speed, because now these operations don't have to be repeated. It's already been defined in our class object, and it's just kind of just, again, updating the data as it comes in. So it actually does have a little bit of a benefit, but it'll be a little bit more apparent once you actually see it in action. And then from here, we're gonna use our property decorator to define a new property. That new property will be called frame. And with this one, it's just gonna return a pandas data frame. And more specifically, it's going to return the self._frame attribute that we defined up above. And then from here, we're gonna have another property decorator. And then with this one, it's gonna be symbol groups. And then, we don't want that underscore in the beginning. Don't need that one. And then this one, again, is going to return a data frame group by. And with this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do symbol groups is going to equal self, and then frame, so the frame that was passed through, we're gonna do group by, and then from here we need to specify a couple things. So what we will do is, we'll see in a second, we're gonna actually create a data frame, and we're gonna have the symbol be what we're gonna be grouping by. So we're gonna say, hey, for this one, let's group by symbol, and then we're gonna set the as index equal to false. And then from here, it's really important that we sort it. It's really important that we sort it. So please make sure you put the sorting. You don't want to have to ever guess whether you sort it or not. So just sort. And you want to make sure you sort, because if you don't, you can have all sorts of issues that happen. You will find that we're going to do actually a multi-index, but it's just one of those things. You want to make sure you sort, because that's obviously going to impact how you calculate your indicators. And then from here, that's actually all we have to do when it comes to grouping. So then we're just going to return that symbol groups back to the user. So you might be going, wow, this doesn't look too bad, right? That's the goal, right? Nothing too bad. And then from here, we're going to do symbol rolling groups. And then with this one, we need to be a little bit more specific, because with this, it's actually going to take an argument. And so with this one, it's going to be int. And so, well, not int, it's going to be size. And that specifies the window size. Okay. And then we're going to say rolling group by. And then we'll just put pass for right now while I move my notes. God, it's so hot in here today. Good Lord. Is this the right one? That's the right one. Okay. Alrighty. So first things first is, if we don't have symbol groups first, we have to make sure we have that. And so all we need to do is we just need to call that symbol groups property, and that will actually run this little section of code for us. So it's very important that this is not none. So if it's none, we need to make sure that we run this property first, or else we can't do the rolling aspect because we have no group to add a window to. That's the way you kind of need to think about it. And then once we do have that, then we can actually start the rolling aspect. So we'll say symbol rolling groups, and then we're going to say that equals, and then it's going to be self, what is it? Symbol groups, and then it's rolling, and then it's going to be the size, so the window size that the user is passing through. Once we've done that, guess what? That's all we need to do. So then we can just return it back just like so. Again, it might not seem like that big of a deal to add this, but trust me, having this kind of just already and defined for us will save us a lot of headache, more specifically when it comes to the indicators. So that's where this is going to really shine, having this functionality already built out for us. It's going to make our lives 10 times easier. Okay, so next we're going to talk about creating the data frame. So with this one, we're going to actually take the data that was passed through when we initialized our StockFrame object, and we're going to start creating our pandas data frame. And so from here, the first thing we're going to do is make a data frame. And so we're going to create a new variable. We'll call it price df. It's going to be a pandas data frame. And then we're going to say it's data equals self underscore data. So this will, again, make a little bit more sense once we get back to the robot aspect, but what we're going to have is a mechanism where we can grab historical prices, and then what we're going to do in that particular method is we're going to organize everything in the correct way, so that way we can easily pass it through to our stock frame object. So I think this also kind of highlights an important part of, I think, the whole project in its own is you really want to make sure you understand how data is going from object to object, because if you don't make it standardized enough, what you will find is it actually will make your life a little bit complicated because you don't know ever what to expect. And so if you kind of make it where it's a little bit more strict, then what you'll find is you can do, I think, a little bit more operations easier if you just kind of force that standard beforehand. So if you make the person kind of abide by a certain role, you'll find that it's a little bit easier to do the operations that you want to do. Okay, so once we've done that, we now have a data frame. Let's start putting some operations inside of it. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define a new method, and we'll do that later. But what we'll do is we'll pass through our price df, and then what this will do is it's going to parse a date time column that exists in the data. So inside of our data, there will be a key that is a timestamp, and that timestamp will have a date time. It's basically an integer. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that column, which represents all of that particular timestamp for each row, because keep in mind, we're going to be getting historical data at very different levels. And so you're can, in some cases, if you go down to like a minute for like 5 stocks, you're going to have thousands and thousands of rows. But the important part is we're going to have a column that is going to have a timestamp. That timestamp basically represents the bar for that particular period in the chart. And so what we're going to do is we're going to parse that date time column to make it a timestamp inside of pandas. That will be advantageous when we start trying to create an index that can handle all that data and make it easy to grab and select rows. From here, we're going to also define another method, which will be set multi-index. Now, some of you might be asking, Alex, is this really necessary to define 2 separate methods just to create your data frame? I don't know. Personally, I could see where people would say, don't do it. Just do it all here. It's probably easier. I tend to find, and I don't know if this has just been my experience, a lot of times this stuff can be deceiving. So even something as simple as a date time column, all of a sudden can get very messy depending on if down the road you want to just do an extra step. All of a sudden it went from 1 line of code to like 6 lines of code. And you're like, wait, what happened? So part of me kind of gets worried, and I just err on the side of being a little bit more conservative and say, okay, just do a separate method, and then go from there. So from here, assuming everything went right, we're going to then return the price data frame back to the user. That's the idea. Okay, and then from here, we're going to do and define our parse date time column. And so from here, it's going to be, what are we going to do? It's going to be the price df. What is expected is a pandas data frame. And then what will be sent back to the user is a panda data frame. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new column. Well, we're not actually creating a new column. We're just basically overriding the old column. So we're going to override a column, which will be called date time. And then from here, we're going to we're going to call the panda toDateTime method. And the nice thing about this particular method is it actually does a really good job of parsing a date time, so a timestamp, and converting it into basically a pandas date time. And so one of the little nice things about it is it makes it easy to parse Unix timestamps. And so if you want to do that, you'll notice there's an argument called unit. There is ns, there is ms, and then Unix is for, Unix is something else. That's for the origin. But basically, if you have a timestamp that is representative of epoch, I think that's how they described it in the documentation. I can't remember, but basically all you want to do is you want to have the unit equal ms, and then you want the origin to equal Unix. And so this will parse a timestamp from like epoch, right? So basically an epoch timestamp. So I did this and then everything came out nicely. I really highly recommend that you have this because it does make it where when you want to create a more unique index, it's a little bit easier to do that. And then we can return back that price data frame. The next one that we're going to do from here is we're going to do that set multi-index. Again, just kind of like the previous one, we're going to have a pandas data frame pass through. And then again, we're going to be returning a pandas data frame back to the original one. So probably we could make it where it doesn't need to do all this, but for right now, we're just going to kind of leave it as is. From here, we're going to redefine our price data frame, and we're going to take our old one, and then we're going to call the set index. And then from here, we're going to have our keys, and those keys are going to basically represent the index. The first index will be the symbol, but we can't just have one index, unfortunately. If we want this data frame to have every stock that we have in our portfolio and every row of data for that entire stock's, price history, we have to have a multi-index data frame. This again will become very advantageous down the road when we want to do more complicated calculations. It's just a little bit easier to have it set up correctly instead of relying necessarily on the user to do it, because a lot of stuff can go wrong in the process. That was really the entire inspiration for this object. Was I realized that we were going to be doing a lot of calculations, and I wanted to make it seem the easiest for the user. And so part of it was saying, okay, if we have this multi-index data frame, it will make our lives easier because we'll find that we can do a lot of the operations we want to do in a much more consistent fashion than if we were using just a single index data frame. So in that case, our second index will be our date time. So this way we'll have a unique index for each row, where basically the first portion of that key will be the symbol, and then the second portion of that key will be the date time. It will be, again, a little bit more apparent once we print out the data frame, but this was actually a very important step in the entire process, was really emphasizing that this was going to be a multi-index data frame, because the assumption was we are not going to have necessarily just one stock inside of our data frame. The problem that really arose from this was a lot of the libraries I was going to be using always assumed the same thing. You were not going to be passing through a multi-index data frame. Their belief was that you were going to be passing through a single index data frame. And then I'm guessing what they were going to be doing is or maybe the user was supposed to select the rows for a particular ticker symbol. You pass it through, get the indicator, pass it back. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of cases that's probably fine. I think in this situation where if you have all these ticker symbols, we'll find I think it's just going to be a little bit easier. That's at least my opinion, but whatever. Okay, and then here's something a little trivial, and it doesn't again sound like a big deal, but this can really cause a lot of headache. Adding rows to a data frame. Very easy to start raising errors that you don't intend to raise. So with this one, as the script is running, we're gonna be getting quotes, right? We're gonna want to add those quotes to our data frame. This is not easy. It's easy if you do it right. The problem is it's really easy to screw it up. And I didn't want to have to put that on anybody. So I said, just give me the dictionary. I'll add it to the data frame. We'll make sure it's sorted. We'll make sure everything's parsed correctly. That way, we're not sitting there and creating a whole headache for ourselves because it just can be an issue. Okay, so with this one, we're going to assume that we want to add a new row. In this case, we're going to have column names be a list. These are the columns that we're planning to, that we're going to have in our data frame. So we're going to have an open price, we're going to have a close price, we're going to have a high price, we're going to also have a low price, and then we're also going to have volume. So those are the columns that we're going to have in there. And then we're going to also have our indexes, right? So we're going to have our symbol and we're going to have our date time. So assuming somebody got quotes for every position in their portfolio, we're going to add each of those rows to the data frame. And so an easy way of doing that is we're just going to loop through the data that the user sent us. So we're going to say, hey, for each symbol in the data that the user sent to me, the first thing I want to do is I want to parse that timestamp. So parse that timestamp. And so what that's going to look like is we're going to create a new variable. It's going to be called timestamp. And we're basically just going to do what we did up above. We're just going to say panda to date time. We're going to take that data. We're going to take the symbol. And then we're going to take the quote time in long. Now, people might be asking, Alex, how did you know that it's going to look like that? Well, part of it is I wrote it, so that's kind of cheating in my own regard. But we're going to be using the TD Ameritrade API. The endpoint that I'm using for getting quotes is going to be the get quotes endpoint. So in previous videos, I've shown that endpoint. There's obviously a lot of data coming back. One piece of data is the quote time in long. And so because of that, what we can do is we can take that information and then parse it from the dictionary that's sent back to us. So we'll grab that timestamp, we'll then parse it. And just like in the historical prices, it's going to be a timestamp since epoch or Unix timestamp. And so that will parse it. And then from here, we're going to define our index. Now remember, we have a multi-index. So for a multi-index, we're just going to define a tuple where the first item in that tuple is the symbol, so our outer index. And then the second one is going to be our timestamp. So that's our inner index. And then from here, we're going to define our values. These are the actual raw values that we're planning to add. And so this is going to be a list. It's going to be data, symbol, and then it's going to be open price. And then I'm going to copy this a few times because we're going to have a lot of, well, we're not going to have a ton, but enough to have a typo, right? So we're going to have a close price. We're going to have a high price. And then we're going to have a low price. And then finally, we're going to have volume. Weird enough, I didn't see it and I could have missed it. But they didn't have a volume for just that timestamp, right? And so I just add the ask size and the bit size. I'm going to check it on tomorrow just to make sure it wasn't something where if I was on the weekend or something like that, it just wasn't setting it back right. But I'm going to double check that. So that might change a little bit just to make sure I'm truly calculating the right volume. But here we basically have all the columns that we're going to be adding to our data frame. So then from here, we're going to kind of mimic creating a new row. So new row. And so we'll say new row equals panda series. We're going to say the data equals the row values. So just this little guy up here. So now we have a panda series object. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to add the row. And so we're going to say self.frame.location. We're going to specify that row ID, because remember, that's just our multi-index. We're going to define our column names because we want to make sure everything goes in the right columns. And then we're going to say, hey, that new row, and we're going to pass through the values. And then from there, guess what? You've added a new row. Life is great. Trust me. Simple task, very easy to screw it up. I did it multiple times, more than I ever want to do again. And then from here, we're going to sort it. Again, sorting is so crucial in this entire process. So you will see me probably sort more times than I should, but I get really paranoid if I don't sort. And again, just as a reminder, we're using that frame property to return the data frame that we created when we call create frame. So again, just want to be clear about that one. So at that point, we've now added a row. I'm going to check the time really quick. Oh, we can do it. Come on. No, we can't do it because we don't have enough to do the other ones. Okay. Okay, I'm going to have to cut it off here then. Yeah, because we're going to have to wait till we do the indicators to do the last two. We'll put it down here just as like a little placeholder, just so you guys can kind of start thinking through it. But one thing we're going to have to add is do indicators exist? This one is going to have a nice way for us to just check that the indicators we're trying to update actually do exist in the data frame. So I like to have it in here. Again, a lot of modification can be going on behind the scenes. Sometimes the user does it intentionally, other times they don't. And so this is just a nice way to kind of protect ourselves where we can check that the indicators we're planning to update do truly exist before we actually start, updating them. And then additionally, it does come in handy when we start trying to do more of the logical analysis when it comes to trading, right? So being able to ask questions like, hey, let's check the signals to see if we have any buys or sells. And so that brings us to our next method, cheek. We're going to have a check signals method. This one will take an argument called indicators, and then this will be a dictionary. And in this case, it will actually return back either a pandas data frame or none. Actually, I think it might be actually return back a series object. We'll just leave it for like that right now. I think it's a series object. I have to double check. But the intent with this particular method is you're going to obviously want to check for signals. Your signals are going to be checked based on the indicators that you defined. And what we'll what we'll see is when you define these indicators, we're going to have a mechanism where you can tell the robot, hey, this is my buy threshold, this is my sell threshold. And we're going to do a little bit of Python magic to basically make it where when you create the indicators, we'll have a nice way of refreshing them as data comes in. But then second, we'll have a mechanism where you can store those thresholds. We'll then use what you stored, and we'll use that as a way of checking whether any of the rows in your data frame, or more specifically, the most recent row, because ideally we're going to be checking every time we get a new row. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking to say, hey, Bob over there said that the RSI has to be above, we'll just say 90 for right now, right? So great. Does the RSI column for Tesla, Microsoft, or Apple, do any of them have an RSI above 90? Oh, well, Apple does. Great. Return Apple back to us. Forget about Tesla and Microsoft. So the idea behind this is a nice way where we ideally will make it flexible enough where I'm going to say, as long as you follow this kind of framework, you can use it for any indicator, but we're also making it standardized enough to ideally make it simple where we can loop through each of those indicators, check the rows, define the conditions, and then only return back the ones that match across all those indicators. this will probably become very complicated very quickly. So I've got something that works. I'm doing a little bit more testing on it just because, again, I'm seeing it my way. So of course I wrote it, so I see it very clearly. But I also know other people use it and they're not going to necessarily see it as clearly as me because they didn't write it. So that's always the challenge, right? I wrote it. So of course, like I'm saying, it's like, oh, that should be obvious, right? It's not always obvious. And so I have to be like taking a step back, say, well, how could they potentially see this? And kind of fun stuff like that. But other than that, that actually does it for this particular video. So again, we just now have at least a basic working mechanism of the stock frame. The next one that we're going to cover is trades and then indicators. And then after that, we will start building the actual kind of a basic script where we'll call some of this functionality. And then more than likely, what's going to happen is we're going to start going back in and start adding more functionality. I have had people ask, they're kind of saying, how many videos is this going to be? Again, it's going to be a few. I mean, I would say at least 3 to 4 more of at least kind of development work. And then probably that fourth video is going to be us actually just writing a basic operation. And then we're probably going to have to go back and walk through some other stuff. So it's just one of those things. This is just a complicated project and there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So I want to make sure I cover everything as much detail as possible. I might not get to every little thing, but I want to make sure you have enough to say, okay, I get what he's doing here. So if I look back at the code and I see what he's doing here, I'm not going to be completely lost. So that's really the intent for it. I don't want to kind of leave stuff out because I think it's just going to make it a little bit more confusing. So yeah, it's going to be probably, I'd say at least 3 more videos before we even start running the robot. Again, I know not everybody really cares about the development aspect of this, but it's important because if you understand what's going on behind the scenes, you can modify it now to fit whatever needs you want it to, but more specifically, it'll just make it, I think, a little bit more intuitive once you actually start writing the script. So again, that's really the intent behind this, is I really want people to understand, hey, what is he doing? Why is he doing it like that? So that way, you can kind of go in there and say, Alex, I don't agree with that. I'm gonna do it like that. Go right ahead. Not gonna judge. But then at the same time, you can just have a better understanding. So, but yeah, so that's basically what's coming up. So thank you again for watching, everybody. We will see you in video number 5. Thanks again.